A direct military strike by the United States on Iran would be one of the most dangerous geopolitical moments of the modern era. It would not be a simple military operation with a clear beginning and end, but rather an event that could reshape the Middle East, disrupt the global economy, and alter international power dynamics for years, possibly decades. Such a strike would send shockwaves far beyond Iran's borders, affecting allies, rivals, and ordinary people around the world. The tension between the United States and Iran has been building for decades. It is rooted in history, ideology, regional influence, nuclear concerns, and repeated cycles of sanctions, threats, and indirect conflict. Iran is not just another regional player. It is a deeply entrenched power with its own military doctrine, regional alliances, and strategic worldview. Any attack on Iranian soil would be interpreted by Tehran not merely as a tactical action, but as an existential challenge to its sovereignty and security. If the United States were to strike Iran, the nature of that strike would matter greatly. It could range from limited precision attacks on specific facilities to a broader military campaign targeting air defenses, command centers, and infrastructure. Even a so-called limited strike would carry enormous risks. Iran has repeatedly stated that it would not absorb an attack quietly. Retaliation would be almost guaranteed, and the form of that retaliation could be unpredictable and multi-layered. One of the most immediate consequences would be military escalation in the region. Iran possesses a large arsenal of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones, many of which are capable of reaching U.S. military bases across the Middle East. American forces stationed in Iraq, Syria, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and elsewhere would instantly become potential targets. Even if U.S. defenses intercepted many of these attacks, casualties and damage would be likely, pushing Washington toward further escalation. Beyond direct strikes, Iran's strategy has long relied on asymmetric warfare. Rather than confronting U.S. forces head-on, Iran could activate allied militias and proxy groups across the region. These groups operate in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, and they have demonstrated the ability to strike military bases, embassies, ships, and civilian infrastructure. A U.S. strike on Iran could trigger coordinated attacks across multiple countries simultaneously, turning the entire Middle East into a patchwork of active conflict zones. One of the most critical flashpoints would be the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway is one of the most important energy choke points in the world. A significant portion of global oil and gas exports passes through it every single day. Iran has long warned that if it is attacked, it could disrupt or even temporarily close the strait. Even the perception of risk in this area could cause global oil prices to surge dramatically within hours. A sharp increase in oil prices would not remain confined to energy markets. Higher fuel costs would ripple through the global economy, increasing transportation costs, raising food prices, and worsening inflation. Developing countries would be hit particularly hard, as they have less capacity to absorb economic shocks. For ordinary people far from the Middle East, the consequences could still be felt in the form of higher living costs and economic instability. The regional impact would likely extend well beyond Iran and the United States. Israel, already deeply concerned about Iran's military and nuclear capabilities, could be drawn into the conflict, either directly or indirectly. Israeli strikes on Iranian targets or Iranian aligned forces could provoke further retaliation, expanding the scope of the war. Gulf states such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates would find themselves in a dangerous position, balancing their security concerns with fears of becoming targets themselves. Iraq could once again become a central battlefield. Iranian aligned militias are deeply embedded in the country's security landscape, and U.S. forces remain present. A U.S. strike on Iran could ignite widespread violence inside Iraq, destabilizing the government and putting civilians at risk. Syria, already devastated by years of war, could see renewed fighting as Iranian and U.S. interests collide on its territory. The human cost of such a conflict would be immense. Even precision strikes carry the risk of civilian casualties, especially when military facilities are located near populated areas. Hospitals, power stations, water systems, and transportation networks could be damaged or destroyed, worsening humanitarian conditions. Displacement could reach into the millions, as families flee violence in Iran and neighboring countries. Inside Iran, the political consequences could be profound, but not necessarily in the way some in Washington might expect. Rather than weakening the government, a foreign attack could strengthen hardline factions and rally public opinion around the flag. History shows that external threats often consolidate power for governments facing internal dissent. Calls for national unity and resistance could drown out reformist or opposition voices. There is also the possibility of internal instability. If the conflict were prolonged and devastating, economic collapse and social unrest could intensify. However, this scenario would come with enormous human suffering and uncertainty, and it could result in chaos rather than a stable political transformation. A fragmented Iran would pose its own dangers, including loss of control over weapons stockpiles and the rise of extremist groups. The nuclear dimension adds another layer of risk. One of the primary stated reasons for considering military action against Iran has been concern over its nuclear program. Yet many experts argue that military strikes are unlikely to permanently eliminate Iran's nuclear capabilities. Facilities can be rebuilt, knowledge cannot be bombed away, and an attack could actually push Iran to pursue nuclear weapons more aggressively as a deterrent against future strikes. If Iran concluded that only nuclear weapons could guarantee its survival, the entire non-proliferation regime could be undermined. Other countries in the region might seek their own nuclear capabilities, leading to a dangerous arms race in one of the world's most volatile regions. Beyond the Middle East, global politics would also shift. Russia and China would likely oppose U.S. military action, using the conflict to criticize American leadership and expand their own influence. Diplomatic divisions could deepen, weakening international institutions and cooperation. Allies in Europe might be split, with some supporting Washington and others urging restraint and diplomacy. Cyber warfare would almost certainly play a role. Iran has developed cyber capabilities that could be used to target financial systems, energy infrastructure, and communication networks. Cyber attacks are difficult to attribute and contain, meaning the conflict could spill into civilian life far beyond the battlefield. Disruptions to banking systems or power grids could occur without a single missile being fired. Information warfare would intensify as well. Competing narratives, propaganda, and disinformation campaigns would flood social media and news platforms. Public opinion could be manipulated, fear amplified, and misinformation spread, making de-escalation even harder. There are several possible paths such a conflict could take. In one scenario, both sides engage in limited exchanges and then step back through diplomatic channels, avoiding a full-scale war. This would require restraint, communication, and political will that may be difficult to sustain under pressure. In another scenario, escalation spirals out of control, drawing multiple countries into a prolonged regional war. A third possibility is a long, grinding conflict characterized by proxy attacks, cyber warfare, and intermittent strikes without a clear resolution. This kind of conflict would drain resources, destabilize governments, and keep millions of people living under constant threat. It would resemble other prolonged conflicts in the region, but on a much larger and more dangerous scale. Economic fallout could persist even after the fighting stops. Investor confidence would be shaken, reconstruction costs would be enormous, and trust between nations would be damaged. Humanitarian needs would remain acute, requiring international aid on a massive scale. Despite all these risks, war is not inevitable. Diplomatic options, though difficult, still exist. Negotiations, confidence, building measures, and international mediation could help reduce tensions. History shows that even bitter rivals have found ways to step back from the brink when the costs of conflict become clear. A U.S. strike on Iran would not be a clean solution to complex problems. It would open a door to consequences that no single country could fully control. Military power can destroy targets, but it cannot easily create stability, trust, or peace. The question is not only what could happen if the United States strikes Iran, but whether the world is prepared to deal with everything that would follow. In the end, such a decision would shape the lives of millions of people who have no say in it. It would test international norms, strain global systems, and remind the world that modern war is never confined to one place. The true cost would not only be measured in military terms, but in human suffering, economic disruption, and long-term instability that could define an entire generation.